Hello, my name is Chris Hawkey, and welcome to the Power Trip Podcast. The continuation of the After Party podcast. It is Veterans Day. Happy Veterans Day to everybody who served out there. Thank you very much. If you heard the end of the Power Trip Morning Show, you heard Bruce Richardson, Samuel Verdeja, and John Donovan on, three friends of mine who are part of the Fabulous Armadillos What's Going On experience, a show that we put on that celebrates the music of the Vietnam era, but also gives an opportunity for those three gentlemen to tell their stories of serving our country. Bruce and Samuel were both in Vietnam. John served three tours, two in Iraq and one in Bosnia. I had an opportunity to get to know these guys, and they have stories to tell, and wanted to give them an opportunity to tell those stories. So if you didn't hear the last 35 minutes of the Power Trip Morning Show, I encourage you to listen to that and then begin listening to this podcast as well, because we're going to talk for about an hour, not only about their service, but their life after being in Vietnam and being at war, and how the opportunity to tell their stories has helped them. So thank you for tuning in. Once again, Bruce Richardson, Samuel Verdeja, and John Donovan are my guests on this edition of the Power Trip After Party. So in case you didn't hear the part of the Power Trip at the end of the show there, we have Bruce, Samuel, and John in here, and we'll continue our conversation on Veterans Day and kind of delve a little bit deeper into your service and not only the service of each of these individuals, but life after conflict. And John, I haven't had a chance to talk to you as much as the other gentleman about your time in country, but you mentioned on the Power Trip Morning Show your three different deployments. Now, I know my good friend John Kriesel, who was wounded and lost his legs in Iraq, was in Bosnia as well. And I've never really had a chance to ask him about what that was about. And I think the general public doesn't really know as well. Can you tell me about that conflict and what that was like?
Absolutely. So at the end of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall came down, and former East Bloc communist nations were given an opportunity for democracy and freedom for the first time since the end of the World War, Second World War, and even previously. So Yugoslavia, the former Yugoslavia that was headed up by Tito, once they were given an opportunity for freedom, dissolved into three fighting factions: the Serbs, the Croats, and the Bosniaks. And it was a bloody, bloody civil war, the worst fighting that Europe had seen since the end of the Second World War. And during the Clinton administration, the United States, along with other NATO partners, decided to send in peacekeeping troops, and the original troops were called I-4, and it was the implementation force. And it was so successful that they followed it up with other missions, and those became S-4, stabilization forces. And that's what the Red Bulls got called up to do in 2003 and 2004. So great soldiers like John Kriesel were over on that mission, and our mission was to make sure that these former warring factions never picked up a weapon and started shooting at one another. And it was actually the most successful peacekeeping mission that the United States has ever been involved in. We would go around, soldiers like Kriesel would have the responsibility of going to various homes and knocking on the homes, on the doors of the homes, and saying, "Sir, ma'am, do you have any weapons here that you would like to give over?" And in one particular case, a woman came up with a pristine box of German Lugers from the Second World War that were still in the hay. They had never been touched. And of course, in keeping with the rules for the stabilization force, we took all of those relics and melted them down.
Whoa.
I know. It just broke our heart.
I can't imagine. Yeah.
They belong in a museum, but no, we had to melt them all down. So we were over there from fall of 2003. These guys are crying next to me.
Yeah, I know, right? Literally.
We were there from 2003 to the spring of 2004, and that was the mission of our deployment to Bosnia.
Wow. I have a million questions about that, but I won't keep you here all day. But then you end up with two deployments in Iraq?
Yeah, so I went over to Iraq in 2007. I was part of the Bush strategy that was called the Surge.
Right.
McCain came up with the idea. First of all, he called it the double down strategy, and then the Bush administration adopted it, and they called it the Surge. I went over for a 3-month tour to help the troops come out of Iraq. This was the deployment that John Kriesel was on. and he was on the first part of it. I was just going in on the tail end of it, and to do all of the logistical and administrative work to bring 15,000 soldiers out of the desert. And I stepped off the plane onto the tarmac, and they said, "Did you get extended too?" And I was like, "What?" And they said, "Yeah, we're not going home till July." So my 3-month tour became a 6-month tour, and I worked as the S1 of Task Force Wild, which we took from the Minnesota Wild. They gave us permission to use their name for this task force, and so I was an S1 for a battalion of 1,500 soldiers.
Wow, that's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah, it was. We did all of the administrative work that involved the giving of awards, combat action badges, Purple Hearts. In fact, one of the soldiers on our tour, Chad Malberg, who the last time I heard he was serving as a law enforcement officer for the St. Paul Police Department. But Chad was the first Silver Star recipient of any Red Bull since World War II.
Wow.
45-minute firefight, and was just incredibly heroic actions where he got out of his vehicle, exposed himself to enemy fire on several occasions. I was the S1 who got the report, and I'm reading it, the narrative. I mean, when soldiers had just come out of the field and they were writing down what happened. And so I'm reading these reports, and one of them said that there was enemy fire coming from a location of 150 meters away, and they couldn't suppress it. And so Sergeant Malberg got out of the Humvee, exposed himself to enemy fire, took a shoulder-mounted rocket, pointed it at the enemy position, fired the rocket, and then no more fire came from the enemy position.
Wow.
Direct hit.
Wow.
Direct hit.
and I'm reading this because this stuff has happened like 6 hours ago, and I'm like, wow, this is like the narrative that I've read from World War II Silver Star recipients. And so when it came in, they were going to give him a Bronze Star, and I said, send this back and tell him to write it up as a Silver Star admission. And he was awarded the Silver Star by then Governor Tim Pawlenty, pinned it on him when we came home.
Wow. One more thing about that, real quick. This is a question I've thought many a time. When I was a kid, when you joined the National Guard, you weren't expecting to be deployed to go fight a war. When did that change?
Yeah, so I mentioned on the show earlier today that I joined the New York National Guard just in a Try-1 program, go in, drill, train, and then hang up the uniform after that. But I rather liked it, and it was good, and they said, you've got a college degree and you've got active duty time, you should put in for a commission. So I submitted for a commission. I got my commission in 2000. But the Guard changed right at the start of 9/11. And we became a augmentation force for active duty. And so as active duty forces were going over to Afghanistan, we were backfilling and providing support to them. Some of our deployments were involved in Europe because troops from Europe were getting forward deployed, and then we would backfill them for the places that they were in Europe. But then in 2003, 2004, the Red Bulls got called up for Bosnia because they were no longer sending active duty troops there. So then we had a peacekeeping mission. But then by the time we invaded Iraq in 2003, we were getting deployed in some cases more often than active duty soldiers. When we got what we call a RIPTOA, relief in place, transfer of authority. RIPTOA, relief in place, transfer of authority. I'll try English. It's my native tongue. And I was there with some first division, the Big Red One, right? And so the Big Red One, I mean, these guys are a historic division in the history of the United States Army, the Big Red One. And so I saw them, and I'm like, how many times have you guys deployed? And they're like, oh, this is our first deployment. Now, this was in 2010.
Wow.
And I'm like, say what? This is my third. No, it was the first time they had been deployed.
They were deployed in Vietnam, too.
They were, yes.
And we used to say, if you're going to be one, be a big red one.
Yeah.
They, but in those phases of when we were prosecuting two wars at the same time, Iraq and Afghanistan, the National Guard was hand in hand with active duty troops. I mean, it really ramped up. But that year of change that you were talking about was probably 2003, 2004.
Again, that's Major John Donovan over here. Samuel Verdeja and Bruce Richardson are guests as well. And again, if you're just tuning into this, you need to make sure you catch the last 40 minutes or so of the Power Trip Morning Show this morning as we celebrate Veterans Day with three veterans and talk about their service. Bruce, we've had you on the morning show before, and again this morning talking to you a little bit about your service as well. But I haven't talked to you as much about leaving Vietnam and trying to get back to the real world. And I want to spend some time with all you guys talking about getting back to the real world and how tough that must have been for you. But what was that like for you? I know you, from what you were saying, there may have been a little bit of a ramp down for you. And from what I hear, that's not always the case.
Well, I had a unique experience. I came back from Vietnam. I had another year and a half to go in the Army if I were to stay in. My duty assignment was Fort Carson, Colorado. And I determined that I was going to take it easy. I was going to ski and just have a great time. And I actually taught skiing at West Point. In fact, I taught Pete Dawkins, the Heisman Trophy winner. I taught Pete Dawkins how to ski.
Wow.
Now, that's not a big deal because Pete was such a great athlete. We took the lift up to the top of the hill, and in 2 turns, he was off skiing on his own.
Some guys are like that. Yeah, right.
Some people can do things like that.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I got to Fort Carson, decided I'd ski a lot, and I did that, and I taught skiing at the Broadmoor, so I got passes to ski all the big areas in Colorado. I had a ball. However, this one colonel who was determined to keep me in the Army, Daryl Irvin, and Colonel Irvin and I, he said, hey, I'd like you to take over Alpha Battery, which was an artillery battery there at Fort Carson. I went down and I needed to talk to the first sergeant. I said, I won't take over the unit unless he and I can agree on how things are going to be. And I went down there. And so this was my transition. And I sat down with this incredible man who'd been in the Army for 20 years. And I chewed him out. I said, Top, which we called the first sergeants, I said, I have seen the previous commander hung out. And I said, I don't ever want to be left hanging. And Sergeant McDonald was a big guy, sat up straight. He says, Captain, let me tell you something. He says, if you and I are going to work together, we'll see. But there are 15 units down this street who want First Sergeant McDonald to be their first sergeant. So if you don't want me here, fine. I got plenty of places to go. But he says, if you do, this is how it's going to be.
Wow.
And he says, if I disagree with an order that you give out, he says, I tell you once. He says, if you still want to go ahead with what you want to do, I tell you twice. He says, if you still want to go ahead with what you want to do, I tell you the third time. And if you haven't listened to me by that point, I have not left you hanging. You has done hung yourself.
Wow.
And that was an incredible transition. The other thing that happened was I went back to Washington. I wanted to make a deal with the Army. And I said, if you'll send me back to grad school, get an MBA, and then go back to West Point to teach, then I will stay in. And this colonel sat up straight, and he said to me, he said, Captain, the Army doesn't make deals. Here's what you're going to do. And he laid out, and the way he laid it out, I'd go to a couple of schools, then I would go back to Vietnam for tour 2 as an advisor. I'd been hit the first time. I had no intention of going back to Vietnam. And that is what cemented my decision to get out. Then 2 years of grad school at the Wharton School in the University of Pennsylvania, that was a great transition for me. And then it was going into business from there. And it was pretty good, but the Vietnam thing really never goes away until I got to sing with you guys and the Fabulous Armadillos. And Sam and I have talked about this. That is a great transition for us. And to tell the stories to those veterans and they come up after the show and talk to us, and we just love it. And one more thing. Sorry, I'm taking a lot of time.
Go ahead.
here,
No, we got all the time in the world.
one more thing. When Sam and I are talking to those guys, the Vietnam vets, afterward, they're our age, over 70, and they want to talk. They want to tell their stories, and so we listen to. They've heard our stories, so now they get to tell theirs. What's amazing about that is behind them are their kids. The kids are now 40 some years old, and their eyes are just like saucers. And they're listening, and they'll come up to Sam and I afterward and say, "He's never told us that before."
Wow.
And that's powerful.
That is. And that's a perfect transition, Samuel, because we were talking a bit in the break room before we came in here and started the podcast about the fact that you didn't talk to anybody about anything for the longest time. There's so many different ways that I want to ask all of you guys this question, but I guess I want to start with you by saying, what kept you from talking about it? How were you able to live your life putting that in a box and putting it away?
I've never been asked the question that way, which is very interesting. And it's a tough question to answer on one hand, but it's also now back then it was a tough question for me to answer, even think about. But now it's a lot easier. John and I were talking earlier about my keeping my distance and being reactive when somebody came near me. That no longer the case. And you asked me how old I was, and I had to think, how old am I? Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, right. No, yeah. Basically, what I'm asking is, how do you? Because so from the time we've been doing the What's Going On show with the
Right.
Fabulous Armadillos, you guys have been doing it for 8 years.
Right.
Right. From the time you leave Vietnam when you're 19, I think, or around 19, 20 years old. Yeah, 19 years old. Until then, when you're in your late 60s, basically, from what you're saying, you didn't open up about what had happened to you and what you had seen.
Yeah.
How do you live that many years keeping that in a box?
Yeah, thank you. It was hard. I mean, it was. First of all, when I came home from Vietnam, the first thing that happened to me is that I thought the country was gonna. Hey, great, glad you're home, and not even my family didn't know how to talk to me. People didn't know how to ask me questions. They didn't know how to talk. So we became loners, and I couldn't find anyone to talk to. Why? Because I'd go out and have a drink or two or three or four and five, 6, and then we start talking to the guy next to us, right? Civilians. Big mistake. We don't talk to civilians about how we feel. So it was real difficult. So we started to become more and more lonely. And I said, I put my Vietnam chip away one day, and I just forgot about it. Why? Because I tried to attend the University of Minnesota. Didn't work. Anti-war movement. I was called baby killer. I was called this. I was called that. I was afraid someone was going to shoot me, and I'd have to kill him because I just got done in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Somebody messed with me. I wasn't going to do anything. And John, speaking about the weapons that you had to throw away, I tell you, they took my weapon away from Vietnam, my .45. I carried it from 14, but the .45, we all had our stashes, and they literally strip searched us, and we could not bring anything, grenades, .45s, whatever, because a lot of guys did. But at that time, it was towards the end of the war. So I felt naked when I came home. I didn't have my weapon with me. I didn't have my flak jacket. I didn't have my. All I had was I started to get angrier and angrier. So it took me, many, many years before I became human again. And I remember walking. Let's see, that was 1970. I came home October. I think I walked into a VA office for help, and I can't remember that exact date or time, but maybe like what year are we in? 1980, 1990,
Wow.
in the mid 90s. I walked in the first time ever, and I said, I need help. But I never went back. Why? Because I didn't like the guy. He was a civilian, and he was talking civilian stuff for me. Now, however, so that had a lot to do with who we talked to, who he didn't talk to. I began to talk to other veterans. Had he been a veteran who understood exactly what we understand each other, I would have been saved years before that. So I just kept being a loner, and I told John, I was sharing in the break room, that about 30 years ago, I lived alone, apartment, apartment. Finally, I bought a condo and lived alone there, and did my share of beverages and so on. And I still didn't talk to anyone. Why? Because I talked to one of my brothers one time, bless his heart, he's gone. And he goes, and I'm talking to him, just sharing my feelings. He goes, "You're not going to go post on me, are you?" And that's the family member. And he wasn't being offensive. He was just ignorant of the fact of who I was. My own family didn't even know me. So it took a long time for me to come out and begin to talk to people. So for up to the time of the Fabulous Armadillos, I literally was very silent in who I talked to. And now keep in mind, I did a lot of talking public in that, but that's different than talking and sharing individually as we do now. It's way different. And that was hard for me to do because it started to take its toll. And I shared a little story, which I'm not going to talk about here, the decision I made of how I wanted to live or not live. And I decided that during that time that unless I did something, I was not going to live very long, die of old age or something. And things began to happen that saved me. And one of those things is that advice another veteran gave me. He says, "You're not going to talk to anybody. You talk to a lot of people. You can address 1,000 member audience, but you don't know how to talk to people about who you are. You need to start talking to other veterans." So the minute I started talking to other veterans is the minute that I started to feel good about who I was and started to be nurtured. And John, you brought up a good point about, people couldn't come near me. "Hey, Sam, hey, don't even go there. Don't come near me." People who knew me kept their distance because I trained them to keep their distance. Don't touch me. Don't come near me. Don't holler at me. Don't make noise in front of me. A lot of things. So, and how long did it take me for me to become human? I would say about 8 years ago, during the Fabulous Armadillos, I started to heal.
That's a lot of life, man.
And as Bruce said, people would come to us, and it's healing for them, but it's also healing for us when they come to, and they want to talk. Because who else are you going to talk to? They haven't talked to their family. I went through that. They haven't talked to their friends. I went through that. We went through that. They haven't talked to their neighbors or anyone. So now they see us sharing our stories with them, and who do they come to talk to? They come to talk to us.
I got to tell you, having only been in this group for a couple of years doing this show with you guys, I can't even look at the audience when I'm singing, especially when I'm doing Ray Charles. I can't do it because there's always somebody in the first 3 rows that I can see who's breaking down.
Oh.
So I can see the healing on the faces in the audience, and it's been an incredible pleasure for me to be a part of that, John.
Yeah, Chris, there's talking with Bruce and Sam. You'd asked earlier about how the show got started, and I'm going to go back a few years. I grew up in an alcoholic home and discovered drugs and alcohol at a very early age and got into recovery at a very early age. And so my friends have always called me an old soul. I think my record collection goes from about 1960 to 75. And then I stopped buying albums because there wasn't any good music after that.
Right.
But when I went to college in the early 80s, I was in classes with a lot of Vietnam vets who had come home in the late 60s or early 70s and dropped out of society. And then they were finding themselves 10 years after the war and using their GI Bill to go back to class. And so I'm sitting in the class, and there was a bond, there was an affinity that I felt with them because I had been a loner growing up in an alcoholic home. I had the secret. I couldn't tell anybody. I didn't trust anybody. I was hyper-vigilant, and somehow I felt a connection and bond, although I had never been, in a combat zone and I had never been through the experiences, but I felt an affinity for them. And then when I would hear their stories, one guy was instrumental in bringing the Agent Orange story to Congress and helped to get benefits for Agent Orange. Sadly, just when that went through, he died of Agent Orange. I have another very good friend who just died of Agent Orange-related disease. I just felt this incredible infinite affinity for them, and it always was in the back of my mind, we should do more for Vietnam veterans. We should do more for them. We should do more than just, hey, thank you for your service. Now that you've been home for 20 years, I'm going to say thank you for your service. And I always felt like there was an incredible healing with music, that music had the power to go places that just talk therapy couldn't go. And I knew Greg from some previous shows that he had done in conjunction with the Minnesota National Guard, and I approached him one day and I said, you guys do so much of this music. How about doing just a few songs in honor of the men and women who served in Vietnam? And he said, a few songs, why don't we do a whole show? That was in January of 2018. And then for the next few months, we worked together to come up with this concept. And originally, I had pitched to him this idea that we would have a Greek chorus of veterans, like in a half circle in the back of the stage, dimly lit, almost silhouetted, like looking at the musicians in the audience, not in a judgmental way, but just as sentinels. And Greg was like, yeah, that's way out there. But then he said, but I do want to incorporate veterans and I do want to incorporate narration. And so I started probably in the spring of that year looking for veterans, because I studied theater in high school, I studied theater in college, and I just thought that this would be a great opportunity for veterans to get up on stage and talk about the stuff that they experienced. And I got zero takers until I realized, oh, yeah, I'm asking people to get up on the stage and bare their souls about some of the most painful experiences that they've ever experienced. Yeah, who wants to sign up for that job? But bravely, two soldiers here next to me stepped up and said, you know what, I'll do that.
Yeah.
Back to you.
Yeah.
Well, it was good timing for us, too, because, I remember when we met with John, and I thought, hell, I'm here because my ego tells me to be here. And this is true. My ego said be here because you're being asked to be in a band. At least you check it out, and you can say, at least I auditioned. Right? And as I'm sitting there listening to John, I go, this is an opportunity for me to tell some stories, but what stories do I want to tell? Because we provided a script to you. And so I really downplayed the script because we don't get into graphics and that. And I go, well, I'll just give it to them, and if they accept me, I'll take it. And then, I can always bow out and not do it, because once I start getting into, and you've seen this in band, once I start talking, I can get emotional because there's still a lot in here.
I'm sure.
It's never going to go away. And I said, well, okay, I'll give it a try. It's only for 3 concerts, and then they added a matinee, and then I can go home and continue to deal with my life. And so I did that, and I felt good. I felt really good about having the opportunity. And I think, John, you remember, because you're the first one that came up to me, and Bruce followed. After I did, it was a practice. It was at the Paramount Theater.
Okay.
We practiced, and I got off stage after doing Good Night Saigon.
Yeah.
My script, and I walked out. I walked down the stage. I walked the length of the stage because I didn't want to cry in front of anybody and show my emotions. And John and Bruce came up to me and gave me a hug. And that was the beginning of my commitment to myself. But I say that because a lot of veterans don't have the opportunity that I had. And that's what encourages me now to continue, because not that I was ever going to say I don't want to do it anymore, but I really thought, I didn't really believe that the fabulous what's going on at concerts would be a continuation year after year.
Sure.
My God, we're getting a great response, and people tell us we should have it in this city, we should have it in that city. And so we have a lot of support out there. So for me, it's healing for me, but it's also healing for the people that we deal with on post the concerts, on stage, families, kids, siblings.
You can see it on their faces. You can. And I've heard so many people have the reaction we were talking about, where the kids say, I've never heard Dad tell that story before. Bruce, are you surprised that you're able to do what you do on stage, that you're able to tell the stories, or has it always been something you could do?
There were many years where it simply was not easy for me. I just never talked about it. In fact, my West Point connection, I cut them all off. I've never been back for a reunion. The only time I went back, and this is what helped me transition, was they named, I've mentioned Gary, who was killed over there. Gary was killed, I think it was June or July of 1969. And again, that was where my anger really welled up. And he had told me, he had come into where I was doing some shooting. He was behind me, and a voice said, 3-4, you don't know what the hell you're doing. And I was taken aback. I looked back, and it's Gary. and he just, we laughed. We did a little drinking that night, a little smoking cigars, and just had a great time. And he told me about his daughter being born. Well, when they named the shooting range at West Point for Gary, because he was a crack shot. I mean, he was the best and nationally recognized. And when they named that for him, that's when I decided to go back. And I got in touch with his daughter. And Jennifer and I got talking, and we decided we would meet for dinner the night before. And I said, how will I recognize you? She said, Bruce, you'll know me. No problem. I said, well, what will you be wearing? She said, Bruce, you'll know me. No problem. Got to the restaurant, recognized her immediately because she had inherited Gary's nose. And we used to call him Eaglebeak. And and she was just the greatest person. So I got to tell her about her dad.
Wow.
Because nobody had talked to her about Gary. Now, of course, I didn't mention how he had died and all that stuff, but we just got to talk about him. And Gary and I, we lived close to each other. I was in Rhode Island, he was in Massachusetts, but the two towns were quite close. And so we used to ride back and forth together, and I always claimed my mother liked him better than she liked me. But anyhow, the old Smothers Brothers,
of course.
Mom always liked you best. So, but it was this wonderful transition that I went through. And then after that, I got a call from my daughter's high school. The AP history teacher, they were studying Vietnam, and they wanted me to come in and talk about it. And that was the first time I really talked publicly about my experiences. And the kids were just so wonderful and so good to me. And my daughter was in the class. And so there's a lot of pressure at that point. But it was just great. And that's what started to open me up about it. And then when I got the call for the Armadillos, before, and the radio audience should know this, if you haven't heard Chris Hawkey sing, you really should, because he is the best.
Here.
Amen
But
to that.
prior to Chris was the lead tenor was Billy, and Billy was this fabulous singer and just a great guy. And I didn't think, when Billy retired, I thought nobody could take his place. Chris Hawkey stepped in. We never missed a beat, and it has been fabulous. And that experience over 8 years in front of 50,000 people, I mean, that's been a great experience. And when Sam and I talked to the Vietnam vets afterward, it just touches your heart.
It certainly, and I appreciate you saying that. And I got to tell you, taking over for Billy, that's the most pressure I've ever been under. And I've had a charmed life. But I appreciate that. And it's just a joy to be a part of the show. And again, John, I know it was your idea, so thank you. I appreciate it very much.
Well, it's a joy to listen to you sing, and you bring so much to the stage. You bring so much to the audience, and there's a authenticity that you bring to the performance when you do "God Bless America." It just sends shivers down my spine, and you can see that reflected in the audience as they're. And it's that whole theater thing, right, about where the performer is sending energy to the audience, and the energy comes back, and you can see it. It's palpable.
Good. Thank you.
I do want to add one more thing. There is another song, and unfortunately, Sam gets to introduce it. I don't, but it's a piece of my heart. And when
I have a reason for introducing it.
Yeah, right.
When Pamela does that song, I mean, it's like, she's back.
It's unreal. Pamela McNeil, yeah.
It really is. And Pamela does that song, and when she does that song, the audience just goes crazy. It is. If you haven't seen the show, you really have to come, not just for that song. Chris does a pretty good job.
Yeah, it's an incredible band. I'm lucky enough to do that show, and I do the party band stuff with the Fabulous Armadillos as well throughout the year, and it's just always an honor to be on the stage with those guys. And the show's called What's Going On? The music of the Vietnam era, and it's a show you've got to see if you have not. And if you're interested, check out Fabulous Armadillos on all the social media pages, and you can check out chrishawkey.com, and we'll post the link as well so you can come see. We have some shows coming up after the first of the year, and I can't wait to get back on stage, and we do need to take that show to more places. It is Veterans Day, and I'm sure you guys have other places you want to be, and I got you up early to come in, so I don't want to keep you all day, but I want to end this interview, because I want to do many, many more, on a really, really serious topic. And it's a question that I have that I'm not sure how to ask. I've been thinking about it for about 24 hours now. I was sitting on the plane on the way back from Jacksonville last night trying to figure out how we won that game, and also trying to figure out how I was going to ask this question. But I would guess, and Samuel, I'll start with you, because I know... man, I can't imagine the things you saw. And we were talking about how it affected you after you got home and how it affected you for so many years. How do you deal with your mortality today? And how did you deal with it as you were drawing closer to the day you got to leave Vietnam? How do you deal with the idea that not only we all know we're going to die, but how do you deal with the idea that it could happen right now?
When you say right now, you mean in Vietnam?
Yeah.
Entering Vietnam, you don't know what to think, what to expect, because till you enter the arena of combat. And then I remember, I was a tough guy, but I'm also a soft guy. So soft, tough, right? Entering Vietnam.
Sure.
All right. When I left Vietnam, there was no softness in me. Backing up. The reason I got hard is because I saw my buddies die. And it was tough, hard for me when I left Vietnam, knowing that I left my buddies there.
Mm.
So one of the symptoms that I'm diagnosed.
Yeah.
Diagnosed. Yeah, I'm 75 years old.
Yeah,
Give me a break. Okay?
I got you. We knew what you meant.
Thank you. It's the only thing I have to fall back on. I was diagnosed with survivor's guilt. I survived.
Right.
My buddies didn't.
So it was their mortality you were having the hardest time with.
Absolutely.
Wow.
Absolutely. Now, if I would have died, got hit over there, I don't know how it happened. I don't know. I've had so many in my lifetime, but more so in Vietnam, opportunities to get hit, die, whatever. I'll give you one example. My first patrol as a squad leader, I took a squad out. One of the guys was green. I don't know if I ever told you guys this story. He's green. And we're going to talk about this. I coach. We're going out on patrol. Here's what you do. Point man, tail end Charlie, 60 gunner in the middle, blooper, M79 here. It's all strategically set up, so if you get hit, you know how to do an effective firefight. You don't just line up and say, here I am. It's strategic. So I took him out, and we went out, and I made a decision, and this is what really hurts. We're in an open area surrounded by tree lines. And I go, do I go in the open area, risk getting hit from all sides, and we'll get wiped out, or do I go through a tree line and then we'll see what happens? So I chose it, and I walk point. I chose to go through the tree line. One of the instructions was, you step in the exact step the guy in front of you steps, right? He had issues with it. He got a Dear John letter. Dear John, his wife, girlfriend, whatever. Said, oh, by the way, I have a boyfriend. Anyway, so he stepped that far to the right. Took out my whole squad. Me and the radio man survived. Why? Because the fragments hit the radio, and the radio, I was in point man, so I was in front of the radio man. I'm still, to this day, if I see him, I would tell him royally off. It'd probably smack him upside the head, silly and everything. Then I'd kiss his feet, and I'd kiss him and hug him and say thank you. But he's dead. There's nothing I could do about it. He died. I didn't. Any one of us could have stepped on that landmine. He stepped on it. He took out everyone. So, and then there's other things where if a guy is walking next, and there are times that you're in combat, bullets are flying, and you go, the next one's mine. I'm going to die. So I'm going to take somebody down before I die, as many as I can. You get really arrogant and tough. And then the guy next to you gets hit, and you don't, and you walk away clean. That's what hurts. So coming back, I was dead inside for many, many years. I didn't come to life. I kind of came to life, but went back to being numb, in and out, in and out. So my mortality for me is that I count my blessings every day when I go to bed at night. When I close my eyes, I say thank you. When I wake up every morning, as soon as I open my eyes, I say thank you. And throughout the day, my worst nightmare, and I'll end it with this, my worst nightmare, some idiot in America shoots me. Mm. And if some idiot ever shoots me before I die, I'm gonna kill him. I'll kill him. I ain't going down without a fight.
I'm telling you, I believe that 100%.
And humor has made a difference for me. I have to have a sense of humor sometimes, but and I do it selectively. Like here, I couldn't do that somewhere else. And I know I'm doing it for an audience, but it's for a good purpose. But I'll tell you, today's Veterans Day, and I'll end with this. Every Veterans Day, or most Veterans Days, we get all Veterans Days, we get a free lunch, dinner, breakfast. And that's very kind and very appreciative. And I always order 2 plates. I go by myself, I order 2 plates, one for me and one for my buddies. And I'll sit there and I'll have breakfast, lunch, or dinner with my buddies, and I'm talking to a plate. I'm talking, hey, eat that. Remember when we were in the bush, when we were in the boonies, we were surrounded, couldn't get any supplies, and we had to eat roots and that? Eat that damn egg. I know you. So, I have and people would look at me like, talking to themselves. And most veterans understand that. I've seen other guys talk to themselves, and I know exactly what they're doing, right? So that's today. I'm invited to an event at Metropolitan State University, and then after that, I'm going to go have lunch somewhere by myself and have lunch with my guys. One of those guys is that kid. I call him a kid that died. So
the person you've described to me, I never met him. I've only met this guy, and you are such a bolt of sunshine. It's so good to know you.
Thank you.
Bruce, same question for you. I can't imagine the things that, and also I have to say, knowing a little bit more of your story, the things you did, the bombs you called in on people. I mean, that's a whole nother facet of dealing with mortality, is what you do to people. How did you deal with that?
I think, Chris, the big deal for me was I thought I was invincible. I was an airborne ranger, toughest guy in the unit. I thought I was. Until when Gary got killed, mortality struck a whole new chord. Again, we'd met there in Vietnam. We'd drunk together, smoked cigars together, and talked. And it just hit me really hard. Until that day I was shot down in the helicopter. And all those things go through my mind, but I never thought that I would get it. I was invincible. But when we came down in that helicopter, literally brought me back to earth. But the one memory I have in Vietnam that I would like to eliminate from my mind, which I can't, is crawling away from that helicopter. It was on fire, and working with the greatest colonel in the world. He said, Bruce, get the hell out of there. I'll buy you another radio. But we low crawled out of there. When we got to our guys, we knew where they were. We knew where we had to go. And we were low crawling out of there. And I rolled over a rice paddy dike. They were built up in little pools of water. But this was dry season, so it was dry on the other side. But on the other side was a body. And as I rolled over that paddy dike, I landed on this kid who was dead. And he had already started turning blue. He was a kid. He couldn't have been more than 18, 19 years old. He was a medic, and he'd been hit, and he was gone. And I still have that vision in my head of rolling over on top of him. And that's the one I can't get out. And that just gave me a sense of mortality that I hadn't had before. And after that, I can't say I was a little more careful, but I thought about it a little bit more. Going to and I made it through the rest of my tour as a unit commander, and then back in the base camp, which was pretty neat. I mean, we had a swimming pool. It was pretty cool back in Cu Chi. But the idea was that it was tough to get that vision out of my head. Then, after I was back, going through grad school, I met some people who were instrumental in my life. In my religion, it was somebody who just moved me. And in an association meeting of that church, I met this really cute young lady who eventually became my wife. She got me through it. She was the one who, and Audrey Richardson is one of the most fabulous women in this world. And 50 years later, she still puts up with me. But she got me through it. And
Wow.
that was powerful for me.
Wow. Someday, when we talk again, I want to know how in the world you were talking about, Samuel. Everybody's gone except for you and your radio guy. What in the hell do you do now? Not just because of what you're seeing around you and what just happened, but there's two of you. You're in the bush. You got to find your way somewhere. I know you got the radio. I can't imagine how just out of control life must have seemed for both of you guys a lot of the time when you were over there. Who was in control? Who was in charge? And how did you find your way out? I can't even imagine. I get lost going into the woods behind my house.
Compass.
Compass? I don't even know how to use one of those. Where's my phone?
Compass. And throw out a yellow smoke bomb.
Yeah.
They'll find it.
And they'll find you.
Yeah.
Someone's on their way. Someone's on their way to help you. Reinforcements. They're on their way. Meanwhile, till they get there, you have to pop a flare or a smoke bomb to let them know where you're at. And meanwhile, what you think about? I'm going to die. If I'm going to die, I'm going to die killing the people that just killed my buddies. And you're going to die killing somebody. And you know you're going to die. In this case, we didn't die.
Yeah. I think the thing for me was just when the colonel yelled at me, "I'll buy you another radio." After we got back to our guys, and 15 minutes later, another helicopter showed up. I mean, our chopper was still on fire, and another helicopter showed up with another radio. I was back on the air within 15 minutes, and the colonel and I were back up in the air. I didn't like helicopters quite so much back then.
I would guess.
But it was a change for me. But that was part of it. The guys were there, and as Sam says, if you were in a firefight and people got hurt, there were people who flew in, medevac helicopters, dust-offs we call them, and the dust-off would come in. And I remember one night firefight, we were still taking fire, and dust-off shows up, and we had some guys hit, and he got on my frequency, and he said, "We're here. What can we do for you?" And I said, "I don't think you can get in here because we're still taking fire." He says in his Texas accent, "You want to bet?"
Yeah.
Wow.
And he came in and took those guys out right in the middle of a firefight.
It goes with that saying, and we, John and Bruce and I have had experiences when we go sit down in a chair, we got each other's back.
Yeah.
And that's in combat the same thing. It's there. It's there on you hope you never have to use it, but I'll tell you, use it on a daily basis, covering somebody in one form or another. In combat, it's there. If it, like when the landmine, and there was other situations, but this one stands out because that kid, I'm choking right now. But and Bruce, but we have each other's back, and we're prepared to have each other's back. Here in civilian life, I don't trust. Not that I don't like them, I just don't trust them to sit. When I'm sitting, I have to sit facing the door. We have to sit facing the door, and if a civilian is sitting facing, can I change? My family knows this. Change seats with.
Wow.
Yeah, it's that combat syndrome.
Sure. But you got each other's back.
Absolutely.
That's the key, right? I mean, that's the thing about. I mean, you may be lost, but you'll be found.
Absolutely.
Wow, John. I mean, listening to these guys, you're an emotional guy like I am. We've bonded over that a little bit without actually having to say it to each other, but we have a hard time looking at each other sometimes during the concert. But listen to these gentlemen talk and hearing their stories, and knowing that your idea not only for these two, but for so many people out there, has promoted healing. Man, that's got to help you deal with everything you've seen as well.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. I have this theory. At the end of World War II, we're sending thousands of troops home from Europe, thousands of troops home from the South Pacific, and we put them on transport ships, right? And so it's taking at least 3 weeks to get back stateside. What do you do during that time? Well, there was some drinking. There was some poker playing. But they sat around and talked, and they had an opportunity to decompress. And in Vietnam, it was 72 hours.
Was it really?
72 hours. You know, you're flying out. You get to San Francisco. You're mustered out. You're given a bunch of mustered out pay. You're given a train ticket, and you're gone. You don't have anybody to decompress with. And so my idea is that, we robbed the Vietnam soldiers this opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean that we would have eliminated PTSD. Heavens no. But we have learned that lesson now in these modern day wars. We don't let you go home right away. We are going to put yourself in your Fort McCoy or Fort Blevins or someplace, and you're going to have this decompression, out-processing period, which we really could do in about 72 hours, but we're going to elongate it to about 2 weeks to give soldiers an opportunity to come down. Back to your question about mortality, I remember I didn't have the combat experiences that Bruce and Sam had. We got rocketed once a week when we were in Basra. And it just became, we knew on Thursday nights because Friday was the holy day. And so they didn't want to work on the holy day, so they would rocket us on Thursday. And we just got used to, it was Rocket Thursday. But I remember the first time that we got rocketed. And it was this realization. I mean, you have, SimX, you have these training, you're taking indirect fire, go, 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 all right. But the first time that it happened, there was this initial shock, like, oh my gosh, somebody is trying to kill me.
Wow.
And then the thought came in, you're not going to kill me, I'm going to kill you. And the other part of that kind of flipped in my brain was when I lost hope. And it's not losing hope. Being over there, and Sam, you mentioned this in your dialogue, and Bruce and I, the first time we heard it, we looked at each other and said, there's very few people who get this. And you say, at times, I wish I was back there.
Oh, absolutely.
Any combat vet gets that because it's the first time in your life that you feel alive. Everything is alive. It is life and death. It is mortality at its highest. And there is an adrenaline and almost an addiction that comes with it. And what I mean by that is this idea of losing hope. It's like here and now. This is the most important thing I have ever done in my life. Everything takes on an importance. Whether you have to send a message or a radio call or get ammunition or food or supplies, everything has a larger than life feeling. I remember in my section, my guys were moaning about this and that, and I said to them, oh, that's because you're going through this because you still believe that you have a life. And when you give up your life and commit to this, you'll feel a lot better. And about 2 weeks later, a guy came into my office and he goes, you're right. And what it was he stopped thinking about home. He stopped thinking about the girlfriend. He stopped thinking about his job. And he just concentrated on the mission. And then everything suddenly became crystal clear to him that this was the most important thing that he was doing in his life. The problem with that is it is so hard to lose that when you come home. And we're taught that protocol and procedure will keep you alive, right? You do this, you do that. Sam described it just a minute ago about this is where you put the mortar, this is where you put the M60, this is where you put the point guy. If you do these things, if you step in the footsteps of the person in front of you, you will stay alive. You do these things. And it's so hard to transition out of that when you come home. I'm standing in line at Disneyland and somebody cuts in line and I want to take them out. It's like, you don't cut line.
Right.
No, everybody has to stay in a line. So when these guys go off script, which they tend to do sometimes, it triggers me. It's like, no, we stay on script, right? Or I gotta keep reminding myself, I am home.
No, we don't.
It's okay to wander. I don't have to step in the footsteps of the guy in front of me. It's okay to take a different path. I have to constantly remind myself of that I'm not over there anymore, that things are slower here, that we have to have grace and forgiveness and take a deep breath and come back. But I am just so proud to share the stage with Bruce and Sam and with you, Chris, an incredible talent. Thank you for this opportunity to share a little bit of our lives with you this morning.
Yeah, just to add to that real quickly, most veterans, Vietnam veterans, I can't speak for others, have been divorced at least once or twice. And then they meet that one person that saves their lives. But we have a high divorce rate, so that reintegration process for us would have been very helpful because we went through a lot coming home. I mean, fights, drinking, drugs, anger, distance, everything. And when we came home, it was a whole different world that what we had left behind. Had we had something to support us coming home, would have made a big difference in our lives. Suicide rate would have been down. Marriages would have been more intact. Children would have been their children. I feel sorry for some of the children that didn't know their dad. Why? Because he went up drinking or committed suicide, or he went out drinking and got divorced, or whatever. And that's the bad thing about one of the bad things about coming home was not having that reintegration orientation.
Wow.
Yeah.
And I just, one last point. When people started saying to us, thank you for your service, that was 20, 30 years later when that started. And I think it started here in Minnesota. And I used to take offense at that. And I took offense at it because they said, where the hell you been for the last 20, 30 years?
Sure.
No one said thank you for your service. When we came back, it was, whether it was a protest or whatever. Again, I never got hassled, but no one ever said thank you for your service.
That's unfathomable to me. Now, you guys, full disclosure, I was born in 1970. So my apologies for ending it on that. But I've never known any of you to be anything more than anything less than heroes. Do you know what I mean? I can't imagine a nation that would say those things to you guys when you got off those planes.
We don't consider ourselves heroes.
Yeah, but I appreciate that. I understand that. I understand that.
It's hard for somebody to say you're a hero because other people died, and we did our job. And as Bruce said, we did it with honor. At that time, we followed orders of the country. Drafted or joined, we went and did our job, and 99.9% didn't question it. We went and did our job. We didn't say we're going to go be heroes or do this and do that. We did our job with honor. So it's hard for me to somebody tell me you're a hero. Now, I'll take it, compliment, thank you. But it's hard for me to absorb that and accept that. No offense. And I appreciate that. But, I can't see myself as a hero. And I've talked to other veterans who kind of feel the same way.
You know why I say that? I think not just as a term of respect, but I will say this. I'm not sure that my legs would work to lead the patrol you did. I'm not sure I could crawl away from that helicopter. I'm not sure I could have the responsibility for 1,500 people. I don't know that I am made of that.
You are.
You want to answer that? Let me tell you something. I once I got mean and ugly in Vietnam, and I didn't give a damn about anything. My job was to kill Charlie. I don't care what it took. Whatever, I did it. To protect my guys. I seen kids that I trained, innocent, young, American kids, 18 years old. I molded them into hardcore killers, and they loved it. And I left them with that. Some of them didn't come back. So when you say that, I think you underestimate yourself as an American, that if you had to do our job, do the same thing we did, who you are today, believe me, in there is that person that we became. No doubt about it. Would you agree with me, Bruce?
I totally agree.
Would you agree that
Absolutely, because Chris, you're a badass, and that badassness.
Well, I heard that, but
would
I didn't want to
come
bring it up.
to the forefront.
Yeah, okay. So,
Under fire. Yeah, I mean, when your life is threatened, we go back to caveman instincts.
Yeah, and it goes back to that training. And as I say, you didn't need to be in combat in order to feel what we feel. You had to go through the training, and when you get to the bayonet training, where the spirit of the bayonet is to kill. I mean, when they drill that into you, that's it. It turns you, and it changes you from being an 18-year-old kid being trained that way to saying, I'm here for a different purpose.
Wow.
Now, to kill is a heck of an objective. But the fact is that when you're surrounded by those guys, you're going to protect them. And that's what we're there for.
Great way to end it right there. Guys, happy Veterans Day. It's just a pleasure to know you guys.
Thanks.
Bruce Richardson, Samuel Verdeja, and John Donovan. I'll see you on the stage. It's called What's Going On. Look up Fabulous Armadillos. Come see us. I believe February is our next shows.
Roger that.
Yep. But this is not just an advertisement. I really want you to come and see the show, and I want you to see the performances and hear the stories. But if you got somebody who could really benefit, please come out and see this show. It's just a wonderful tribute to a bunch of wonderful people and an opportunity to share some stories and share some love. My name is Chris Hawkey. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll do this again sometime soon. Thanks, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you, Chris.